We've heard plenty about the threat and the impacts of AI-driven disinformation and how it's being used to undermine us, undermine our societies, undermine our democracy. Our next guest has plenty of thoughts about how we can strengthen ourselves, strengthen our societies, and in fact also increase our democratic resilience in the face of this threat. Please welcome here to ChangeNOW, Luísa, Franco, Machado. Luísa. Welcome to ChangeNOW. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thanks, everyone, for being here today.
OK, so let me introduce you properly, because there's a lot that you've got going on in your life here. So, Luísa, you're founder of EquiLabs, which is a global digital rights laboratory advancing the intersectional feminist approaches to AI and data governance. You are also a UN-appointed young leader for the SDGs, a rising star on a political government's AI 100, and you've led work and research on ethical AI and data policy with institutions including the OECD, the United Nations, LSE. The list goes on. OK. But let's switch things up. OK, usually I ask you a question. Let's break the rules here a little bit, because you want to ask our audience a question. Go
Definitely. Thank you so much, Kristen. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all wide awake. I know it's a little bit hard, but I promise the topic is fascinating. At least it is for me. I wanted to ask you a question, and I'm sorry if this is not so clear, the mic, but we can all make an effort. I wanted to do a little exercise with you. I want you all to imagine a government that decides what political content all of its citizens can access. It bans anything it disagrees with, and if you try to appeal, there's really no court to turn to, because that government moved its headquarters to different countries to avoid your country's laws. So picture that scene, right? You cannot have access to the political content you want to, or even if you try to, there's really no way to get it. If you think that would be an authoritarian government, I want you to raise your hand. OK, that's nearly 80–90% of the room. The difference here is that that's not a government. That's how some of the world's most powerful tech companies operate today. They control what we see, they silence what they don't like, and they stay out of reach of laws because there's really no one to turn them accountable. And we call that innovation. Is that right? Food for thought.
Food for thought, indeed. We call it innovation. I'd call that a coup. I call that a tech coup, and in fact, that's very much, I think, what is going on here today. As we just heard from Cecilia, that is indeed their business model, and that's how these organizations are thriving. And yet, when we put that into, as you so very well did, a political government context, no one would really be up for that. Now, how then, can you tell us a little bit more about how is big tech benefiting from this AI-fueled disinformation, and why is it not being regulated in the way that we would seek to regulate sort of a government or a political party out there?
I think we need to stop treating AI-fueled disinformation as sort of this necessary byproduct of innovation. That's really not necessary. I think as Cecilia, as Christoph, as we've heard before, with Tony as well, that type of disinformation is sort of a defining feature of our digital economy, or better, our attention economy. Platforms like X, Meta, Google, they all know that this is happening, but they thrive on the engagement that it gets them, especially when it comes to synthetic disinformation, so that disinformation that is created and generated by artificial intelligence, that has become so valuable, and we don't realize it. It's fast, it's cheap, it's scalable, and what before would need some sort of Hollywood production now can be made just with a couple of clicks. And that is what generates engagement, because people that come across this information, they feel things. They feel rage, they feel fear, they feel hopeful. And all of that makes them stay online longer. What that happens is that generates more ad revenue, which I think we all have heard a little bit. And that just makes those companies thrive. So I think that we need to start seeing this information as sort of this product that has been sold to us, except that we didn't choose to buy it. And actually, we're not even the consumers, we're the product ourselves, because we're all mixed in this sort of disinformation bubble, right? So I know that a lot of people have asked, okay, don't we have laws to counter this? Who allowed that happen? We're not, or at least most of us might not be living in authoritarian governments, right? So why don't we have regulation that sort of stops that from happening, that changes this, this business model? And the answer is a little bit more complicated. Because yes, in some countries, in some areas of the world, we do have laws. Here in France, the EU have a lot of, or a few laws to counter disinformation. One of them, the Digital Services Act. So it's something that you might have heard in the media or on your social media. And it's sort of this law made by the EU to counter disinformation and to hold tech platforms accountable for the content that they impulsionate. The difference here is in the enforcement side. So last year, X, Twitter, has been charged with spreading disinformation on the basis of this Digital Services Act. And what happened is that it let a lot of malicious actors act like verified sources and share disinformation, which has caused, as you can all imagine or you might have heard, a lot of trouble to people's understanding of reality, and it has been getting much harder to define what's truth and what's fake. The issue is that even though it was charged, it kept appealing, it kept giving more information, and that has been over a year ago and nothing really has happened. So yes, we do have laws, but the enforcement hasn't really caught up with that, right?
Well, it's starting. It's definitely not there yet. We have the laws, we have some of the frameworks, but I agree with you that enforcement is one of the things that needs to happen in order for them to actually have the teeth as such and to be able to protect us. There's a lot of talking about sort of like teeth and being fed things and a free lunch here, but what I'm hearing from you is that we're effectively being trained to be spoon-fed this kind of information.
Of course, and I think there's even another issue that comes with this type of reality is that it's this concept that also what is true has been targeted as AI generated, as fake. So something happens, a politician says something, or a company does something, and then they all go, oh no, that's AI. Even though it's not.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, what is AI and what is not? Because even truth has been turned into generated, right?
Used against us. But I want to come back to this kind of almost like feeding metaphor that we're on now, because I know that part of your work is also in combating disinformation, is working and advocating with youth and trying to get youth inclusion in there, into this digital policy making, into some of the rules and regulations out there, because we see that youth are being spoon-fed this from day one now as such. Can you tell us about the work that you're doing there and why you're doing this work?
Definitely. I think we just talked, right, about how AI-fueled disinformation has been harming democracies and harming people's beliefs. But the reality is that young people already know this, because we've been spoon-fed this from a very early age. In fact, there is this research that came out recently that says that nearly half of the US teenagers don't really trust tech companies to curb AI-generated disinformation. So, and I would argue that this is much larger in global South countries where regulation really hasn't caught up and where people are really exposed to these threats. So young people really understand the harms of it, but at the same time, we're in the eye of the storm. We're really under the most pressure. We're the most data-fied generation ever. we're the most manipulated generation ever, and there's this really recent stat that came up recently that is actually that young people are less likely to be able to see what is disinformation and what is not. So actually an older person, an elder, is more likely to catch disinformation than someone from the Gen Z. And I think that this is really counterintuitive because we're like, oh, we're digital natives, we know this already, but actually no, we are test subjects. And this is why I've been advocating for more youth inclusion in policymaking, more youth inclusion in decision-making spaces, because we know what it's like, we know what it takes to curb this, except that we're not really getting the traction that we need. I have a digital rights lab, a youth-led digital rights lab called EquiLabs, and what we've been doing is that we've been writing research, writing policy papers. We've been acting on international fora, really to get our voices out there and show decision makers that we know what it takes. We just need to be heard, and we need resources coming to our organizations. We need to be in decision-making positions, but that takes a whole society to do it, right? But it's so important.
Definitely, and I want to riff on inclusion, actually, because yesterday we were talking about inclusion in AI development and how important that was. But when it comes to disinformation, one of the interesting and terrifying things we see here, in fact, is that AI is being used to actually target marginalized groups out there for specific disinformation, okay? Can you tell us about some of the examples you've seen here and the work you're doing to raise awareness of this issue?
Definitely. I think that when we talk about AI-generated disinformation, this is not affecting everyone equally. It's targeting marginalized communities, those who are already at the margins in society, and really changing and personalizing manipulation towards these people or against these people, right? So there are some examples which have been taken over the media in the past few years, and this is of deepfakes targeting women politicians. We know AOC in the US, Jacinda Ardern. We know other politicians in Latin America. They have been sexualized, they have been humiliated, and all of this through deepfakes. So there is also an issue here that is not just societal at large, but we also see some dynamics reproduced in these spaces. So sexism, homophobia, transphobia, this doesn't disappear when it comes to all of these issues. They just transform. They get more accurate, they get smarter, but actually they're not really helping anyone, or if they are, it's so minimal that it doesn't counter all of the bad side of it. So I think that when we think about what has been happening right now, I would love to say, oh, we've been advancing, we're developing more safeguards, but actually, I feel like we're coming back. Recently, just this year, Meta rolled back its fact-checking program, and this really got all over the news about how Meta is taking away some of its safeguards to the most minoritized populations. And just a few days after this decision, some really weird things started happening on Instagram. For example, posts saying that women were born to be sexual slaves were on, or that LGBT people were mentally ill. And all of this has an actual impact beyond the screens. It impacts our policies, it impacts our lives. So I think that when we talk about this, the cost of this disinformation divide, it doesn't go to everyone equally. And again, through my work at EquiLabs and these spaces, we really try to bring this sort of perspective. That's why we say we're an we're intersectional feminist lab, because we do think that bringing more intersectional perspectives to technology really helps us all.
So I want to come to that in the few minutes we have left. And you've been talking just about sort of this imbalances that we see out there. I want to talk about power imbalances. Tony started us off talking about sort of like the power out there. In a recent podcast interview with Joe Rogan, Mark Zuckerberg called for more masculine energy, okay? You, however, Luísa, you're advocating for feminist AI governance, okay, as a counterbalance and to help us in the erosion of our democracy. What is this? What is feminist AI governance, and how does it support and strengthen our democratic systems and our values?
Yeah, I saw this statement by Zuckerberg, and I think that this really contributes to what we call the manosphere happening today in the tech world, which is most tech companies are governed by men. And I think that the answer to this is feminist AI. And here, I want us to really drop all of our preconceptions. I know feminist is a word that people may not be comfortable with, but here I use this word feminist to rethink power imbalances. Because for me, what's at stake when it comes to AI and disinformation is a power imbalance. And if we want to shift this, we need to restructure systems of power. We need to redistribute power to different parts of society. And for me, this is what feminism embeds. It's really by getting that intersectionality, so really including people beyond just the white man, not because the white man doesn't have its place, but it shouldn't have all of the places. It should be everyone. And I think that for me, this is really what feminist AI embeds. And we see right now that in order to get the truth out, we need to rethink the types of systems that this truth has been built on. And for me, feminist AI is a democratic project. It's a project that really brings everyone to the table. Because if we're talking about AI and democracy, we really need all voices out there, all voices making change, having a say in what's decided and what's not. And really, for me, that's what feminist AI is like. It's just not just ask, oh, how to fix this tool, but really ask, who built this tool in the first place, and why are we using it? And I think it's a little bit what Cecilia said in her speech, is like, why are we subjecting to these types of technology when we could have alternatives? But these alternatives don't just come out of spite. We need policies that really advance them. We need companies willing to take the risk. And we need people engaged. We need everyone engaged. So for me, really, feminist AI and democracy are really, really one thing. And I think that it's really not just a strategy, it's more like a survival pathway to democracy. And that's the future I'm fighting for, and I really hope that everyone does too.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope through this session we've heard from some amazing speakers here. If I can just condense some of these things to talk about this power imbalance that we've just been addressing. And in fact, Tony started us off by talking about the power. Christoph and Cecilia also, whether we were talking about economic power or our own agency with critical thinking. And now continuing on with that with you, Luísa, it's thinking for us about how can we reclaim some of that power? How can we bring some of that back to help us in this battle against disinformation today? Thank you very much, Luísa. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.